fall is finally here. It's time to sip some apple cider, bake some pies, and get all snuggly on the couch to watch a really good movie. The only problem is you're not sure what to watch. Don't worry, the filmmakers at DSTV have some suggestions from our watch list to watch this year. The documentary I watch this time of year, I look for two different kinds of things to watch on like my streaming platforms. Things that are nostalgic and things that are like spooky, because it's like fall, it's time for that. Were you guys old enough? I don't know, you guys are all younger than me. If you read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, those series of books. Okay, so I watched the documentary on that. It was only an hour and a half. It wasn't like a series or anything like that. And they talked about how some school districts actually banned the book, which I didn't know was a thing. So they talked about Alvin Schwartz, who is the author. And they talked a little bit about like his family history and how he got into writing and things like that. And then they focused a little bit on why the books were banned. And parents would complain that like in their elementary schools, their kids were like, it was too scary, it's inappropriate, it's this and it's that. And then really you learn that all of those stories are based on folklore from like other cultures. And Alvin Schwartz was really like a journalist first, and he would interview people from all over the world at Princeton University, actually, like on their grounds, to kind of listen to the kind of stories that like their grandparents would tell them. So his goal was to, instead of just have like a word of mouth, like, I don't know if there's anything your parents ever tell you that it's like a tradition or something, or a superstition. He really wanted a written record of these old like folklore things. And they interviewed a lot of artists, like musicians, like illustrators. A lot of their work was inspired by the fact that he was trying to challenge, like, children's stories have to be nice and pleasant and like a happy ending. When he wasn't trying to like harm anyone or scare anyone, he was just trying to A, share history, and B, just kind of spook some people out. So I really enjoyed it. I thought it was interesting because Alvin Schwartz is deceased. He's not alive anymore. But his son did talk with the first mom to have an issue with the book, and her complaint to the school district kind of sparked a fire all over the rest of the country to kind of, again, like a word of mouth, like it spreads that they didn't want their children reading these books. And they were really popular when like Goosebumps was becoming popular and a couple of other things. And it was just so strange because I still watch Goosebumps. Like, I'll still put it on Netflix when I'm baking or doing like decorating for fall or things like that. And to think that that could have almost not been part of my childhood, or, you know, and it's a censorship issue. You know, if you don't want your kids to read the books, then don't let them check them out from the library. But what good is Halloween without being like a little spooky? I would probably rate it a 7 out of 10, honestly, only because I really enjoyed the content. And one thing I really did like about it too is that they didn't have B-roll for an interview. Like if they had to do something over the phone and they didn't have it, they would use the same type of illustration and make like these little cartoons of like the audio that they were using, which I thought was really like interesting. I will say it is a little slow, but oddly I feel like they tried to cover too many topics in such a short amount of time that it probably could have been a 45-minute series just to kind of cover, here's his background and why he started writing these things, and here's about the book ban, and here's like the final with the son and the woman who hated the books, like having their final interview. So 7 out of 10. I thought it was really, the music they used was really like creepy, and but it was almost like, have you guys seen Rocky Horror Picture Show? Like I'm into vintage stuff. You know what it is. Yeah. So these like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the fact that you guys all know what they are too, they're like a cult classic.
So you said this time of year you like spooky stories and you like nostalgic stories on your...
No, because I don't actually like horror movies. I like to be like a little spooked, like a little creeped out, but I don't mess with demons or spirits or like anything like that, because I don't like to invite that negativity into my house. Don't laugh at me. Like, I just think, like, I don't, you know what I mean? I like psychological thrillers, like history on, like, Salem witch trials. Like, I'm into stuff like that. But I don't like not being able to sleep at night. So, yes, I do like Hocus Pocus any day. I'd watch it every day, any day. But
would horror fans like this documentary?
I think if scary stories to tell in the dark, like, struck you becoming a horror fan, then yes, you would enjoy it. But it wasn't scary. Like, I wasn't scared when I was watching it. Yeah.
Do you think you have to have read those stories to understand this documentary, or do you think you could understand without?
Half and half. I think you would appreciate it more if you did read the books. But they did have references to, like, some of the illustrations that parents were deeming too creepy, and they did have some someone reciting some of the words at one point to kind of quote what was going on in the actual plots of the stories. I think you don't have to read the books to understand it. I think if you're any kind of, like, avid reader, you should, because it talks about banned books and censorship. But I don't think you have to read it in order to kind of get it.
I think, like, a lot of old stories, especially, like, books that were adapted to, like, Disney movies, they really have, like, dark backgrounds. Like, if you look at what the actual stories are.
Yeah, the Grimm brothers version.
Yeah.
True, like,
I don't know any specific, like, stories that were changed to Disney to be more child friendly, but they might be kind of, today they might be too much for kids, but really they're just telling kids a story, trying to teach them something. The documentary that I chose to watch for Doctober was The Last Dance, which is a 10-part series produced by ESPN. It is mainly focused on the last year of Michael Jordan with the Chicago Bulls, and that was 1997 and 1998. Now, it's not just exactly about that final season. It shows his entire life story, along with some of the players that were on that team who helped win him that championship in that final season. Some of those people are Scottie Pippen, who's very famous for being with Michael Jordan for most of his time with the Chicago Bulls. There's Steve Kerr, who now is the head coach of the Golden State Warriors, who wasn't necessarily the greatest player, but because of his key role, his key backup role in that team, he helped win championships for that team. There's, of course, Dennis Rodman, who many know because of his eccentric life, his wacky hairstyles. He lived a crazy life, and it was one of my favorite parts about the documentary. One of my favorite scenes, or the funniest scene, I think, was when he left a playoff game, I'm pretty sure, and he goes out and he has a beer in his hand and he gets on a motorcycle. And I think because I was born in the year 2000, I never got to see Michael Jordan play. I think it's a really interesting look at professional sports before social media and how much these athletes could do. I mean, Dennis Rodman, again, he went to a wrestling event, a WWE event, after a big game. I mean, he's playing on one of the greatest teams of all time with some of the greatest players of all time, and he's just doing crazy stuff. And I think it'd be interesting today to see how people would react.
What kind of format was it in? Like, was it interviews, or was it like...
Oh, so there were 90 different people who were interviewed for this documentary, ranging from coaches for these players, former teammates, journalists, just all types of people. And they had exclusive footage from that season that was never released to anyone. And so for a lot of people who maybe did grow up watching the Chicago Bulls, it was still a very interesting watch. But for me personally, I got a lot out of it because I had never seen Jordan play, and it made me respect him so much more, and of course the people around him too.
Who would you recommend watch this documentary?
I would recommend sports fans watch this, not only basketball fans, but just fans of any sport, because truly it's not just about basketball, it's about what makes up a team. And honestly, for those who aren't into sports, you should watch this because it has many great themes in it, such as all these players came from crazy backgrounds. Michael Jordan, it's famous that he was cut from his high school basketball team, but everybody knows that. Well, sorry, not everyone, but the avid basketball fan would know that. One thing I didn't know, Scottie Pippen, he has 11 siblings, and through that he was in a low income neighborhood and he struggled to make it out, and eventually he was never given a Division I basketball offer. Instead, he worked his way up being a team manager for his college, and then eventually just worked harder than everyone to be drafted by the Chicago Bulls. And as for Dennis Rodman, he was raised by just his mother, and his mother kicked him out of his house. I'm not sure how old he was, probably 17 or 18, but that's another story of him just working hard, working his way up from the dirt to become one of the greatest rebounders of all time. And then finally, Steve Kerr, whose father was assassinated in the Middle East. I mean, that is just a tragic story and just so inspiring that all these players can overcome all these adversities in their lives to make it to the final dance and win that last one.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this documentary? Would you watch it again?
I would give this documentary a 9 out of 10. The reason why it's only a 9 out of 10 is 10 episodes is a lot for a documentary. You need to have a long attention span to really get the full picture of the story. I think some of it could have been shortened. It could have been 5 episodes, maybe 8 episodes. But just the level of there's so much content in it. It's a great watch for anyone.
So like what you said about how, the attention span, like with how it was annoying with how they did it with, it was 5 weeks, 2 episodes each Sunday. So you'd get episode 1 and 2 on that Sunday, and then you'd have to wait all the way until the following Sunday to see 3 and 4. And it was just like, it was really an interesting documentary, and then it would leave you on cliffhangers at the end. They'd be at the end of a series or something, and then they'd go to the next week, and it would be like, I'd be waiting all week and then they would put it at 9 o'clock at night, and I'm exhausted at 9 o'clock at night.
Well, something interesting about that is that the documentary was originally supposed to be released in June, and it was supposed to be every other day, going back and forth from the NBA Finals to Game 1, and then Episode 1 to Game 2, Episodes 3 and 4. But because of coronavirus and people needing sports content, they moved it up and did it every other week. So I thought that was interesting.
I like that it was spaced out because it almost felt like you had like a TV show to look forward to again, like it was off season for like so many different like sitcoms, and then Corona, so it was getting in the way of like new seasons of things. So I think it was a good call on them to spread it out. Did you get to watch it? Did you watch it?
I did not, no.
Not a sports fan.
I would like to watch it. It sounds very interesting, like seeing all the players. Did you have a favorite story?
Just all the Dennis Rodman stories were absolutely insane. I mean, this guy would get permission to just leave.
Yeah, like you said, he in the middle of the season, he just said, I'm taking a vacation. Like, he went up to Phil Jackson, he said, I'm going on vacation this week.
He was like a
disappeared.
wild party guy.
Yeah.
Just like, that's what was so interesting. Like, how, I would ask myself, like, how does he physically perform that well when he's constantly going out and partying the way he did?
Oh, and the way he played the game was mesmerizing. I mean, he mentioned in the documentary, he would learn how to know where the ball was coming off the rim and just go grab it. And just watching him play with his tenacity was just surreal.
Yeah, it was neat.
How do you think social media would react to Dennis Rodman today?
Oh, his PR team would have had a release statement every other day. Just from, what they heard at the hotels he stayed at or the girls he was with, things like that. I really don't think it would fly nowadays.
I stuck with the basketball theme, and I went with No Crossover, The Trial of Allen Iverson. This is a story about how Allen Iverson gets framed in a court case for during his high school days, and he gets sent to prison. So a little background on Allen Iverson. NBA All-Star back in the 2000s, played 14 seasons, mainly with the Philadelphia 76ers. And he grew up in Hampton, Virginia, which was a very racist town back at the time. And he was an absolute star in his area during his high school days, All-American in football and #1 recruit in the country for basketball. And Valentine's Day night on 1993, him and his friends go to a bowling alley one night, and they are put in a lane with white kids, and a fight breaks out between the two groups, and Alan and 3 of his friends leave because they don't want anything to do with it. Then a couple days later, Iverson gets called to court and is accused of throwing a chair and hitting a woman, as testified by a member of the bowling alley who was white. And he is sentenced to 15 years in prison, but he is eventually pardoned within 4 months of being in there. So it's just an amazing story about how, your life can just, at the snap of a finger, change from being on top of your area to going into the jail system. And, you have blink of an eye, you have no idea what happened. So, and then he eventually turned it around to become a 14-time NBA All-Star, and is known as one of the best he changed the game of basketball. He was flashiest player out there. Watching him as a kid that's why I love the documentary so much, because just watching Iverson as a kid was mesmerizing, the way he played basketball. And I would recommend this to any sports fan or somebody who just wants a motivation to, you can overcome anything. Like, if he can overcome getting out of jail, turning himself into an NBA All-Star, anybody can do whatever they want to do.
So, on a scale from 1 to 10, what would you rate this documentary? Would you watch it again?
I would definitely watch it again. They unfortunately couldn't get Iverson to comment on he would not participate in the documentary. So other than that, the documentary was very emotional. It was a lot of emotion from a lot of people who were involved. His mother, his friends, the people from the area. It was you could tell it was really heartfelt, that this was just a devastating event that happened. But yeah, I would give it probably an 8 out of 10. If they could have got Iverson, we probably could have moved that up a little more. But
What happened with the trial? Like, was he found guilty?
Yeah, just because of how the town was, it was very racially influenced, he was found guilty immediately. The film that they got from the bowling alley was very blurry. You couldn't tell who was there. You could see a chair being thrown through the air, but you couldn't tell who it was. So they just assumed it was Iverson without even going further investigating it. It's a really sad story that they don't, you don't dive deeper into that, and you just assume that that's how the times were back then in that area. So
did his friends or the other people involved get in trouble as well?
Him and his 3 friends that left the scene were all charged with 3 counts of felony assault.
Iverson was recruited by a bunch of schools, right?
Yeah.
And he lost a bunch of his offers.
Yep. And the only one that kept him was Georgetown.
Did it tell that story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it dives a lot into his background of his early high school days and how he built that following.
My Doctober documentary was Crip Camp. It's on Netflix, and it is a documentary about people with disabilities and just their struggle, especially fighting for disabilities acts and just equal rights. So this camp that they talk about is a camp for people with disabilities. It began, I believe, in 1951, and it was started by just a group of hippies who wanted equality for all. And that's exactly what they gave. These people with disabilities, these children with disabilities, came to this camp, and they got their first taste of what equality actually felt like. They had games, and they all participated. Everybody had a voice, and, that's not something that society usually gives people with disabilities. This camp taught these individuals values that they brought into the 1970s and the 1980s when they were fighting for the Americans with Disability Act and just equal rights, because in the 1970s even, people still did not have equal access to public transportation and public buildings, which is kind of weird to think about. Like, the ADA did not get passed till 1990, which is less than 50 years ago. So it's been less than 50 years since anyone with a disability has been unable to just have equal opportunities like the rest of us. So there are now regulated ramps. Before, if a building had a ramp, it was fine, but you never think about it until you actually are in a wheelchair, that some of these ramps actually are not accessible, and you can't, like, at a certain level, you can't even go up.
What made you want to watch that specific film?
I think it just came up on my Netflix recommendations, and it was new, I think, last year. It came out last year, and people just started talking about it right away. Like, it's a really good story about handicapped people who are actually represented as people and not, like, people with disabilities.
So they're not, like, exploited, like, their stories are told
Yes.
well.
Yes, these are some of these people who came from this camp are heroes. Like, you do not hear about them ever, and so their stories were finally told, and it was a really good story. I would say a 9 out of 10, because even though there was definitely struggle, I felt like they didn't talk about all the struggle, and so they kind of made it seem happier than it really is.
I think people are scared to talk about it. So they don't want to say the wrong thing, maybe.
So now that the ADA is passed, what is their next step in getting more equity for disabled groups?
Well, I think it just has to do with shifting just these historical ideologies that people with disabilities just do not deserve the same level of livelihood and level of life that other human beings do.
Because that also brings up the idea in my head that if we want to treat them like the normal people that they are, you know, and now we're shoving cameras in their face and stuff while they're trying to just do their normal events, you know, is that the right thing to do?
Yeah. The publicity, it definitely can go the wrong way. Like, the first time they protested in New York, they shut down pretty much the whole city just by standing in one street, and they called it was not a great term for just people with disabilities standing in the street. The headlines were not very appropriate. Like, people, like, anyone needs to watch this, because it definitely shows a part of society that is very much overlooked, and handicapped people represent the largest minority group in the United States, so it's super important that we understand what's happening.
Well, that's about all the time we have. So what we're going to ask you guys to do as our audience is to leave any suggestions of more documentaries we should watch in the comments and why. We'll see you next time from the studio.